No matter how famous or insanely talented an athlete is, they're all going to face two unavoidable things at some point: injuries and slumps. But what happens when that slump isn't physical? What if it's spiritual? Just like a top-tier athlete who suddenly loses their edge, literally anyone can hit a wall where their drive, their joy, and that sense of gratitude just, poof, inexplicably vanish. Today, we're diving into the blueprint for fixing those spiritual slumps.
So, really think about it for a second. Why do even the greatest athletes fall into devastating slumps? When a sudden failure hits us, our natural instinct is to look around, right? We blame the environment, maybe a change in the coaching staff, or just some bad luck. But what if the problem isn't on the outside at all? Think of it like a massive building. When a skyscraper suddenly develops structural cracks, a good architect doesn't just check the weather outside. They look much, much deeper.
This brings us to two very different ways of looking at the problem. The ordinary view, it tries to fix the environment. When things go wrong, people naturally point fingers at external circumstances. They'll say, oh, my community is wrong, or my situation changed. But then, look at the expert view. Master builders and legendary coaches, they immediately check the invisible foundation. They're inspecting the basic mechanics and the structural integrity. To fix the spiritual slump, we've got to stop looking outward and start inspecting our own hidden internal foundation. And getting that repair done requires three absolutely crucial steps.
Let's jump straight into step 1, aligning the direction. Before you check anything else, you have to ask yourself, is your fundamental belief actually pointed the right way? There's a really stark contrast in core motivations here. For example, there's a vivid story in the source material where the disciples were completely powerless to heal a suffering boy. Why? Because they were too busy arguing amongst themselves over who was the greatest. It's wild, but seeking worldly gain, things like wealth, fame, or just avoiding hardship, that's the wrong direction. And it leads directly to a loss of power, internal arguing, and deep spiritual lethargy. The right direction? That focuses on forgiveness, reconciliation, and eternal life. If your foundation is pointed toward worldly success, your entire structure is kind of twisted from the get-go.
Moving right along to step 2, the piercing word.
So once your direction is set, you have to look at what kind of truth you're actually absorbing. There's this fascinating Hebrew concept called masa, which translates to a heavy burden or a weighty message. To build a rock-solid foundation, we can't just consume comforting, easy words all the time. We absolutely need to hear the masa. These are the heavy, prophetic words of correction that act almost like a double-edged sword. They pierce right through our comfort zones to truly evaluate our deepest, sometimes hidden motives.
And this brings us to a pretty tough challenge. Are we only listening to the blessings and completely ignoring the heavy words? Because honestly, a foundation crumbles when we selectively listen. If we only accept the feel-good promises of prosperity and purposefully block out the sharp and, sometimes painful truth of correction, our structural integrity becomes incredibly lopsided. A strong foundation, it absolutely requires both. That brings us to our third and final repair, shifting the center.
To really wrap our heads around this, imagine a professional baseball pitcher. If they lose their physical center of gravity, say they're leaning just a tiny bit too far forward, that pitch completely loses its velocity and effectiveness. Literally, all their power vanishes just from being slightly off balance. Well, a believer loses their spiritual power in the exact same way. It happens when the sheer weight of life rests squarely on their own shoulders. The fix? Shifting that center of gravity entirely away from yourself and onto God through prayer. Because here's the thing, true prayer isn't just a physical posture. It's not just closing your eyes or folding your hands. It is the total conscious transfer of your life's weight. It's looking at that incredibly heavy load that's causing those foundational cracks and consciously shifting that massive burden off of yourself entirely. But what if you feel too weak to even do that? The ultimate diagnostic test for a failing foundation is actually found in this raw, incredibly honest biblical quote. I believe, help my unbelief. The father of that suffering boy didn't pretend to have it all together. He just put it all out there. And admitting your weakness, admitting that your foundation is currently cracking and you just can't hold the weight alone is actually the vital first step to true structural repair. So we need to stop painting over the cracks and start rebuilding the foundation. When things go wrong and you feel that spiritual lethargy creeping in, don't just reach for a temporary distraction. Ask yourself, are you just slapping fresh paint over a crumbling wall? Or are you ready to do the hard, invisible work of inspecting your true foundation? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and hey, keep building on solid ground.